Okay, good afternoon. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed your lunch and you're ready for the afternoon. We have a whole host of outstanding speakers and a further panel for this afternoon. But to kick things off, I'm delighted to hand over to our second keynote speaker of the day. Please welcome the Scottish Labour leader, Anas Sarwar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sandy. It's an absolute pleasure to have the opportunity to come and speak to you all. I know there's a predominantly Scottish audience, but not exclusively Scottish audience. So those that are visiting from other parts of the UK, please make sure you spend lots of money in the great city of Edinburgh before you go. Our hospitality industry needs that boost, so I hope you enjoy your time here. I'm actually going to break with convention, and I'm only going to make maximum three political points, and then I want to move to more general points, because I think it's really important that we have an open and frank conversation around the challenges we currently face, but also what the pathway is out of those challenges. But I want to put right at the forefront of my comments today a commitment that the Scottish Labour Party I lead and a UK Labour Party that Keir Starmer leads is a unashamedly, proudly pro-business, pro-growth party. We want you to be successful. We want you to make good profits. We want you then to use those profits to, yes, of course, pay your staff well, but also contribute to your wider economy. But also we then want to make sure that thriving economy helps us deliver the social policies we want to deliver across the country. And I think for too often, both Labour politics and actually more often than not Scottish politics, we've often led with a social policy lead without actually arguing the case that we only get to deliver all those important social policy ambitions that we have as a country if it's backed up with a thriving, successful economy, and that means a thriving and successful private sector as well. So I want to put that right out front at the bat. Secondly, that as we enter this new phase for our economy, both here in Scotland and across the UK, it is not a competition with public sector versus voluntary sector versus private sector. It absolutely has to be a partnership with the public sector working hand in glove with the private sector to grow our economy and develop our economy for the future. The second thing I want to say is, from a party political perspective, is the easy thing for me to do is to come and speak to this audience and spend my 10 minutes or so telling you why I think the Conservatives or the SNP deserve to lose. I'm not going to do that. The individual circumstances, people can make their own opinions. I think the most important job, though, that the Labour Party has to do, both here in Scotland and across the UK, is the time between now and the next general election. We have to set out why we believe Labour deserves to win and what we would positively do differently to try and lead us into that alternative future. So that's the only political points I wanted to make. The one other point, though, to say right from the front, is right now, right across our politics, I think you have a politics of conflict rather than cooperation, a politics of anger rather than a politics of empathy, and a politics of division rather than a politics of unity. And that means that we end up amplifying the despair many people feel right across this country, rather than actually projecting hope. I know there's lots of people in this room who won't feel very hopeful about our economic outlook at the moment, may not feel hopeful about the coming years in our economic outlook. But I actually think that Scotland and the UK's best days actually still lie ahead of us. And I think with a credible growth plan, both across the UK, but also here in Scotland, that we can maximise those opportunities and deliver a thriving economy for all of our citizens. Now, looking at the current context, rightly you can see our newspapers are filled with talk of the cost of living crisis and what that means for household incomes, where you have rising energy bills, you have rising petrol prices, or at least petrol prices that remain too high, rising food bills. We now have a premium on many mortgages across the country because of decisions made elsewhere. That means many people are seeing their mortgages go up by some £400 or £500 a month, making the energy crisis actually pale into insignificance. And as we head into the next year, it looks like those challenges will continue with continued rampant inflation, lower growth than we would expect, and an expected fall in house prices of around 8% over the course of the next year. And what we need in the face of that is a political debate that, of course, is focused on how we get the balance right between taxation, how we get the balance right around public spending, but it also has to be a political debate that talks about how we get growth back in our economy and how we differentiate between borrowing to do tax cuts or borrowing to spend being a very different approach, where you can borrow to invest in our economy, leverage other funds in from private sector enterprise in order to grow our economy for the future. And the way I think about Scotland's economy is, again, it's very easy, I think, for politicians, my own party included, for us to come up with a full menu of things that we think have to be priorities for our economy. But as you all know in your individual businesses, if you have 10, 15, 20 priorities, it means you have no priorities at all. And therefore, I think for Scotland's perspective, and indeed for much of the UK, we probably need to focus on three predominant growth areas. The first one being a true green revolution. The second one being financial services and how they relate to technological advancement, and the third being around tourism and promotion of brand Scotland. So taking each of them in turn, we have a huge potential around our green revolution here in Scotland, what that can mean for the rest of the UK, and we have to take people with us on that journey. If we are saying to the public that our green revolution means tens of thousands of jobs lost, relentlessly high energy bills, and reliance of foreign imports of oil and gas, and meaning less energy security, then we don't take the public with us, and we do the United Kingdom's interests down. Instead, we have to have a green revolution that demonstrates to people that there are tens of thousands of jobs and opportunities available, that we can bring bills down and save people money on their energy costs, and third, we can have a self-reliance here in the UK rather than relying on imports from despotic regimes in other parts of the world. But how do we do that? So you'll have seen the announcement from the UK Labour Party around the Great British Energy Company. We are in the formation of building the Scottish business case of GBE and that business plan for GBE here in Scotland. That's about investing in hydrogen, the huge opportunities that has for the North East economy, but also the wider Scottish and UK economy. How we finally realise the opportunities around carbon capture, how that's then supported with the plant we have in Grangemouth, with the pipeworks that lead directly up to those carbon capture facilities, how we look at district heating systems and how they partnership with our revolution in house building across the country to make sure we have properly insulated, affordable homes right across this country too. But it also means having an honest conversation around a nuclear base that I think we need here in Scotland and across the UK. If you look at all those leading economies around the world who have 100% of their output requirements coming from renewable sources, almost all of them have a baseline support coming from other forms of energy supply. So let's take Spain as an example, which has gripped much of that economic revolution around renewables. They maintain at all times at least a 15 to 20% baseload that comes from nuclear power generation. Scotland and the UK has to look at a similar model to give ourselves confidence and security for the future, and we're going to continue to build that business case between now and the next general election. The second part, which is probably most relevant to the audience I'm speaking to today, is around our financial services. Financial services and the wider professions contribute around 12% to the UK's economic output every year. In Scotland, it's around 9.5%. That is something that we have to maintain, strengthen and develop going forward. That means partly giving you stability, and we've not had much stability for a very long time. It's about building confidence, and that means confidence in terms of the decision making we're making, but also a partnership in terms of developing the policies that go to the future. But it's also about addressing much of the challenges you face around technological advancement, skills base, and also giving you the financial incentives to continue to operate here in Scotland and indeed across the UK. And that brings me to the technological hub. At the moment, take Scotland as an example, we require around 13,500 tech jobs every year here in Scotland, but actually we're only producing around 3,000 people with those skills to meet our economic needs here in Scotland. That's not credible, it's not good enough. Of course, migration plays a part to meet some of those short-term challenges, but migration alone cannot answer all those challenges we face in terms of that 10,000 job gap. And that's why we are very clear that we need to create a technological hub here in Scotland, backed up with government support, government priority, government money, in order to build those skills to deliver those financial services. But actually, it's not just our financial services that would benefit from that. The delivery of our public services will also benefit from that too. The only way we're going to address the massive challenges we face in our public services, whether that be delivery of world-class education, whether that be delivery of world-class health services, we're only going to do that if we harness the technological advancement that allows us to take our services into not just the 21st century, I think we're already 22 years too late for that, but have us ready for the 22nd century. So that has to be a priority. And then the third priority in terms of that economic growth plan has to be around tourism and also Brand Scotland. If you look at the two cities that probably largely drive the Central Belt economy, of course you have Aberdeen and Dundee around the northeast that drives those city economies in the northeast and the Highlands and powers much of the UK. We have failed to properly develop our airports in terms of direct routes so we can have greater tourism and relationship between our cities and those that want to bring opportunities from other parts of the world. That means less people coming here, spending their money here, investing here, and exporting to other parts of the world from here as well. So how we develop those city routes, I think, are really important. That also then needs to be backed up by the transport infrastructure we need across the country. So yes, people come to our cities, but they also then take the opportunity, having come to our cities, to go and explore the rural and remote parts of Scotland that make us one of the most beautiful nations in the world. Go out there, explore, spend money, learn, and export back to other parts of the world too. How we develop those routes is absolutely important. And then regional development hubs across the country too, meaning we don't have financial agencies that are investing the public money into the glory projects that are probably likely to be successful anyway, but actually looking at those companies that genuinely need that little bit of help to get them over the line so they can be thriving going into the future and creating those tens of thousands of jobs, opportunities for the future. And then finally, Brand Scotland. I don't think we have properly produced and developed that Brand Scotland ethos. Scotland has an emotional attachment, of course, with the rest of the United Kingdom, but it actually has a huge emotional attachment with much of the rest of the world as well. Take the US as being one market where much of the US population has heritage and roots here in Scotland. Why can't we be working in partnership with our airports, working in partnership with our airlines, working in partnership with our delivery of our hospitality sector here in Scotland to say we are going to develop a programme where people in Scotland can trace their roots, go and see their family's historical lines, also then see the opportunities they have to enjoy Scotland, spend money in Scotland, invest in Scotland, but then also take the produce of Scotland and go and export it to other parts of the world. I think that Brand Scotland approach is something that we can really feed off in. The final couple of points I'd like to make is much of the public discourse has been, of course, around the impact on household budgets of the cost of living crisis. But alongside a cost of living crisis, we actually have a cost of running a business crisis across this country as well. That is largely meant because of inflation, largely because of the energy price increases we see here in the UK and indeed across the world. So how we have proper caps in place around energy prices is going to impact what businesses are then seeing in terms of their own costs. Greater demands on these private sector businesses for fairer pay deals because your own staff are confronted with huge challenges because of rising inflation and the cost of living. But third, alongside that, massive labour shortages, where you have a whole host of people, a generation of people actually, who coming through the pandemic have not got economically active again now that we've come through the worst of that pandemic, but also the huge shortages we've seen as a combination of Brexit, but also a combination of the UK, I think, turning inward on itself rather than looking outwards and building those networks and those relationships. So if we are going to have a thriving economy, if we are going to get growth back into our politics, we have to make sure we are addressing the cost of running a business crisis across the country. And so the point I'd like to finish on is, of course, there is despair, but we cannot be in a situation where we are feeding off people's despair rather than giving people the hope they need for the future. I genuinely believe that we can come through this crisis as a stronger, more equal, more thriving, more just Scotland, more just, more thriving, more equal UK, and then having a louder, more prominent voice on the international stage. I don't believe that that is part of our past story. I believe that's part of our future story. But that means we have to give people hope in the face of that despair. We also, secondly, have to, in the face of the anger we see too often, demonstrate that there is an empathy and a togetherness and a willing to cooperate, not just to play on conflict across this country. And third, I believe we have to build an all of us rather than us versus them that we see far too often. Whether that's an us versus them when it comes to our economy, whether that's an us versus them when it comes to our identity, or whether it's an us versus them that comes between individual communities. That requires partnership, cooperation, leadership, and that also requires a credible growth plan where the private sector and the public sector and the government work in partnership rather than in foes in the future. And we are really, really serious. And I think you can see from the summer till now and what we've planned for future weeks and months as we lead up to the next general election, we are serious about not just talking about what is wrong in our country, but making sure we're amplifying what we can get right and do differently in our country. And I believe if we do that, then at future conferences, we'll be talking about these successes and how we take those successes to the next level, rather than just talking about how we manage decline here in the UK. Thank you very much.
On behalf of everyone here at the conference, I'd just like to thank Anas Sarwar for those very thoughtful, very compelling comments. And I'd also like to thank him for his role in re-energising the Labour Party's dialogue with our industry and indeed with business in general. One of the points that I thought was particularly striking in Anas's comments was the green revolution, something that is a challenge and an opportunity for our industry, for our country, and for the world at large.